Today isn't going to be a review, it's kind of going to be a look into something off camera, not even paying attention to what I'm saying. Howdy, my name is Stee and welcome to my movie menu. Today isn't going to be so much a review as kind of a look into how Hollywood works and how they interpret stories and how film and stories in general, even fairy tales, stick along this kind of pattern as well. Now, anybody out there who's ever seen more than one movie will kind of start to notice a pattern. Every story has three basic acts. Act 1's pretty simple. It's just kind of show who the main characters within the story are going to be, the backdrop or whatever, and just kind of what's going on in the world around them, and, you know, the basic premise of the movie is set up in this first act. Now, Act 2 is split up into two separate parts. Part 1 is pretty easy. There's an obstacle introduced for the main characters to kind of overcome, but they fail. In Act 2, Part 2, they have to kind of come to terms with themselves and their own limitations and all that kind of stuff, and kind of build themselves back up mentally as well as more than likely physically. And generally it happens with outside help. And then finally Act 3 is kind of the showdown with the main antagonist or the obstacle that's in their way. It could be a person, it could be an event, it could be anything like that. And, you know, they come back from where they were in Act 2, which was really low, and then they come back and they win, basically. They win the movie. That's basically it. And then sometimes there's an Act 3.5, which I'll just kind of throw in at the end for a so-called Hollywood ending where everybody's really happy and everything works out grand and everybody's great. Now, this formula is used in nearly every single movie ever made, ever. I'm going to talk about two of my favourite movies of all time. First, I'm going to start off with The Lion King, obviously. So, following these rules, in Act 1, Simba's born. You're introduced to his family. You're introduced to the world around them. And you're kind of given the basic premise of the film, which is Simba is to become the new king. In Act 2, Part 1, something bad happens. His dad is killed. Then the obstacle that's introduced is that he gets blamed for it, so he ends up running away. Then in Act 2, Part 2, he meets Timon and Pumbaa, the outside help. And then time comes to terms with who he's supposed to be, which is the new king. Then in Act 3, he comes back, fights Scar, Scar dies, and wins the movie. And then this film has an Act 3.5 as well. At the end of it all, after everybody's gone and done and dusted, they have their own baby, and then that leads on and so on and so forth. Boom! Venue change. And the second movie I want to talk about is one of my all-time favourite kind of live-action films, and that's Biodome. Probably one of the best buddy comedy films you'll ever see in your life ever. It stars Pauly Shore and Stephen Baldwin, and it came out when I was a kid. Okay, Act 1, you're introduced to the characters, you're introduced to the world around them, you see the people in their lives, you see their girlfriends, you see them, and the general area of where they are. Then towards the end of Act 1, you see them getting trapped in the biodome. Therein lies the premise of the film. Okay, so they're in the biodome, and then Act 2, Part 1 happens, which is the bad thing. Okay, so they're in there, and then they have a party. They invite all their friends and whatever, and they open it up, and then they ruin the experiment. So that's kind of their obstacle that they face and that they fail. Then Act 2, Part 2 happens pretty much straight after that. They're cleaning up after the party, and they realize what they've done, and they talk to the scientists, and they're really pissed at them, and blah, blah, blah. Then you have a conversation with their girlfriends, the outside help, and they come to terms with what's just happened, and then they may change themselves mentally to, you know, get back on track and fix everything, basically. Then Act 3 comes in, and they face off against the scientist that went insane, and they get homeostasis back to 100%, and everybody's happy. So everything, they've won the movie, as expected. Now, the reason I chose those two movies is because I've seen them dozens and dozens of times, and I know the ins and outs of the movies themselves. But this formula can be used for nearly everything. That new book that's coming out that you want to get, new movie that you really, really want to see, chances are you've already seen it. Just something to think about. And this concludes another episode of Stee's Movie Menu. Thank you for joining me. I know, at least that didn't take 4 hours like the last one.